Hello, and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism through passionate people doing incredible things. Hi, I didn't have an intro planned for this, so hi, I'm Trey, and I'm joined by my co host, Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily, and I had an intro planned and then forgot. So today I'm just Emily. Here we are.
Here we are, and we're dancing, and we're vibing. Um, I am so thrilled for today to have a returning guest with us. So, Emily, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to introduce our guest today.
That would be great because I'm new today.
Well, fans of our show, we have a returning guest with us. I'm so excited to have him back. We had him originally on the podcast a year ago in August. So I am so thrilled and excited to welcome back an incredible artist, an incredible educator, and promoter of all things artistic, and also an incredible lover of puns, which we'll get into. Please help me welcome back to the show, Alex. Tanaka, Alex.
Tanake!
Welcome to the show.
I think if I were to do my own intro, I probably would have said something to the effect of, "Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm a screaming cat that deserves its own Oscar mic."
Yes.
I like this.
Which is funny because we talked about intros in our episode, and you had said wanting to do something along the lines of Trixie and Katya, and
That's right.
so that was actually going to be my first question, was what was your intro going to be? So you already answered
Well,
it.
there it is. I was like thinking of it as y'all were introducing me because so I didn't have that up my sleeve beforehand. I should have though.
So last time it was just you two. I was off doing a thing. And so we have not really gotten a chance to chat before. So this is very exciting for me. And also, I'm excited to find out kind of what's been going on with you since the last time that you were on the show.
Yeah, it's been a year. You
Okay.
said it. What you said a year in August, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to
Crazy.
believe. Mm-hmm.
Because I think when we last spoke, it was during the Resurgence and Renaissance exhibit at the Columbia Museum of Art.
Okay.
Which was one of hands down the best artistic experiences I think I've ever had. Which was really, really cool. And we can talk about that or revisit it in a minute too. Since then, I have been in two smaller shows, not solo shows or anything, but I just have a piece, which actually highlighted on the graphic for the show today. That piece is in a gallery now, actually, and I'm just kind of doing my thing. I think I talked about it last time how like, and I think a lot of artists can relate to this in the sense that like I don't always think about making art. I think about just like doing it,
Okay.
like making something or whatever. And that's kind of what I've been doing. I've been fortunate enough to take on a couple projects that I can't talk about yet, which is nice.
Mm,
And then
love
just
those.
like, yeah, right. Yeah. And then just I'm fortunate enough to be creative in my everyday life, in my, day job and everything too. So it's really neat to kind of live. It's been nice to kind of live the day to day without a whole lot of stress recently. So that's been very, very nice.
Low stress is very nice. What
Yeah.
sometimes that's a luxury
Yeah,
for
it
many.
is very, very much,
Yeah.
especially for artists, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right? Mhm.
yeah, the grind.
Right. And that's funny you brought up being creative every day or on the daily or regularly. I chat with Laura Packer often. She's been on the show a couple times, and one thing we started doing recently was based on a thing I did back in July. It was the July Creativity Challenge that was, I can't say it was started by, but in my life it was started by Brooke Shaden, a photographer. And she was doing this thing where it was like, you're going to go out every day and just be creative somehow. Somewhere in your life, you're going to be creative. And then you're going to post about it to inspire others, but also to like push yourself. And I just assume, I guess, like I'm generally creative, but like I've never thought about forcing myself to be creative every day somehow, like consciously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did it in July. And like there are no rules, and we're adults, so like we can skip a day if we need to, or
Yeah.
we could you know, whatever, we could like do the same thing more than once even, you know. So there's no rules as long as you're creative. The idea was just to get in the habit of doing it. And I have to say that kind of changed me a little bit because I was more conscious about it. And so she wanted to do it too. And we started doing it together where we're going to text each other every day the thing we were creative about. And through August, maybe part of September, we weren't perfect.
Yeah.
But it started this thing where it was like, oh, she's sending me something she was creative with. And I was sending her things. And like we've fallen off a little bit since then. But it's something that like if you don't think about being creative every day, how are you creative every day? And I was going to ask you that question.
Oh, that's so good. So, like, I don't want to be contradictory, but I've never been the type of artist, or even, you know, when I was younger, the type of musician to, like, practice every day. That's never been my thing. I think because, like, the way I picture it in my head is that I have a finite amount of, like, creative energy. And so then, like, I get to a point in either a project or a day or a moment, you know, it could be a lot of different things where I'm just like, I'm done with that. Like, I'm done with that. And it could be just for right now, it could be indefinitely, it could be whatever. But I've always wanted to be successful at Inktober.
Oh, yeah.
That was like, and of course there was drama that happened a few years ago and all those things, but like I've always loved the idea of like October or whenever, you know, intention. I like what you said kind of like about intention, you know what I mean, of like consciously doing something creative just for the sake of doing something creative. And so it's been a lesson in the sense that like I've really enjoyed doing it. I've missed a day, but I've caught up and things like that. But it's also been interesting because it's been another reminder to be kind to myself as a creative. Because I, you know, I'm a designer by day. And so I have to be creative for my work. And that, like, I feel like that comes from, or usually comes from rather, a slightly different bucket of creativity. You know, like money is a motivating factor,
Sure.
You know? And so, that can kind of help that move along, but at the same time, the creativity that I reserve for myself, or like the artwork that I might make that doesn't have anything to do with graphic design, that might be like storytelling and what have you, I have to remember, like, it's just been a reminder of like maybe why I don't make every day. And that's not to say that it's been a negative experience, but it's also like, you know, I don't want to burn myself out on like forcing myself to make something every day. And then I think what I think about too is that like the quality tends to suffer. Like it's kind of like a muscle, right? Like, yes, I can kind of work up to doing something a little bit more. Or in my life, I tend to have periods where I'm like cramming a lot of like really awesome, and I don't mean that to be self-serving, but like stuff that I'm excited or passionate about into like a short time frame. And then after that, I'm like, I need a week. you know what I mean? And so then I take a week and I feel better for it, but I also feel really proud of the things that I've accomplished. So I know that this response has kind of been all over the map, but like I think the takeaway from all of that is that like I love being creative as often as I can, but I also like to remember to be kind to myself whenever I don't have the energy or the spoons or the capacity to do so too, because that's not how I make my best work. So, yeah.
When you step away, like you talked about taking a week off or taking a break for the rest of the week or whatever, do you find yourself, or do you ever intentionally refuel somehow? Like, do you go out and seek inspiration?
Occasionally. Sometimes, oh, this is awful. Sometimes, sometimes I'll think about upcoming projects, so it's not quite as like
Right.
restful as maybe it could be.
Of course.
I ironically I love art museums, so I don't get to go nearly as often as I could or would like to, but sometimes I get inspiration from seeing really cool exhibits, or sometimes I get inspiration from like Instagram or Pinterest or something, like seeing really cool works by other people. That has really come to be something that inspires me a lot too. In just like, I like seeing different methods and techniques. You know what I mean? And as a digital artist, that becomes really interesting. But I just like seeing the different ways that people make things, and that helps me to refuel for sure. Might be a good movie, you know what I mean, like in
Sure.
terms of like photography or videography or anything like that, like
Hmm.
seeing incredible work from a cinematic perspective, just because even from like, I would like my photography to be a little more cinematic, and so like that's kind of been, when I'm not actively making something, kind of been where I'm like, my brain has gone, of just like, hey, I there are cinematic techniques in different films. Like, I've really gotten into film, which we can talk about that too.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But like, that's really been driving a lot of like personal creativity for me lately.
I mean, from a like more so, how do you stop yourself from picking into one bucket to use for the other creativity? You talked about
Mm.
how you have one
Ooh, good.
for kind of that corporate space and then one for your
Yep.
personal creative space. How do you make
Yep.
sure you're not overextending and reaching into that other bucket and burning yourself on both ends?
That is a question for my therapist.
Fair and accurate.
um, I I would say that I do it pretty subconsciously. Um, I have, over the past like couple of years, I've really learned the difference between working in design versus working in art. And I feel like there's such a big overlap there, because like design can be art, but art isn't necessarily design, kind of like that whole squares or rectangle situation.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And I think that like being creative or designing out of necessity kind of automatically draws from this one bucket, right? Whereas being creative because it's a piece that I want to make and a story I want to tell, I don't really feel like I can draw from this other bucket as easily. And this is just like in my head, really. I think that
Right.
when it starts to impact each other is when I start to get burnt out. So like, if I am working really hard or I'm feeling really overwhelmed at work, that impacts my energy level to be able to create on my own.
Mhm.
um, and I think that that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
But I am fortunate to work with a really amazing team who has really good leaders, and we tend to balance that out pretty well. I've worked in places in the past that has not done that, and you're burning the midnight oil and burning the candle at both ends. Um, but literally, I don't know if they would consider it, but almost everyone on my team of designers, and I didn't realize how uh, maybe, I don't want to say rare, but maybe uncommon this is, but almost everybody on the team of designers that I'm on does art in some form,
Cool.
like some kind of like it some like, so our director is a sculptor.
Okay.
We have a couple of illustrators. We have a couple of people who, and have done kind of industrial design. So it's just like,
Mhm.
we have all these different schools of creativity, which not only makes a really neat design team, but also we all have a pretty great understanding with each other of what that like creativity bucket looks like for one another. And
That's
that's
neat.
like been life changing. That is
Right.
absolutely life changing.
How
It's like
awesome to work with other art brains.
Yeah, it's if I could always have the option in the future to work with other art people, I think that this has taught me that I absolutely will, which is refreshing.
On the last, I want to go back to the comment you made about going to art museums and seeing something like tactile and that informing your art. It's funny you bring that up because you talked about wanting to get more into textiles or into more tactile art.
Mhm.
Um, do you see that because of that transformative element from transforming from the physical medium into your digital art, or do you see that just as more of an extension of your existing artistic vision?
You've hit on something, Trey, because I was like, what am I going to talk about tonight? um, since the last time I was on here, I've actually started making physical art again, which
Yay!
is like also life changing, kind of, because it's really hard. I'm gonna just like, I mean, I would love to talk more about design too if y'all want to, but
Yeah.
like from just an art perspective though, like fine art, if you will, it's
Mhm.
really hard to translate sometimes digital work to traditional and vice versa. Like they don't always play well together, and that's been like kind of a conundrum for me in the art that I like to do. Um, so I've just kind of been experimenting. I bought a sketchbook again because I love filling sketchbooks like when I can, and so that's actually been part of like the drawing every day in October. I It's been really refreshing to purchase materials or start using materials in a way that I'm not concerned about the preservation of the material itself. And to kind of like elaborate on that, I I always, like when I was younger and even now, I'm like, hey, I spent money on this. I need to like savor it, and like I still have that to some degree, but also I feel like it's been really freeing to just I bought this sketchbook with the intent of destroying it. Like artistically. Like I
Good.
want to yeah. Like I want to, like I don't want to like worry about if the paper is going to buckle. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to worry about if the marker is going to run out.
I
I don't
see.
want to worry about, all of that, because like those thoughts were like holding me back from how I can create with everything. And
Yeah.
that has been like completely changing. Like that
It's
has
a
been
freedom.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. And so I recently started, I have it right here if you guys don't mind. Um oh no, it's been messed up a little bit. Let's see. Okay. I'll
We
show you the
can't
side.
tell.
I know, but the canvas buckled a little bit, it looks like, so I'm gonna have to figure that out. But this is one half of
So he's got Oh, look at this. Okay.
yeah.
Ooh.
So describe
So
for our listening audience what you're holding up.
hi.
His face is between two pieces of art.
Yes, my face is between two pieces of art, and I'm gonna put them back down now, just because I don't want to hold them up. They are. I'm obsessed with Rorschach prints,
Okay.
and like really organic, um, like patterns and things. It might look like in other pieces it might look like topography prints, but Rorschach was a psychologist who started the idea like ink blot
Yeah.
imagery, and so that's what those canvases were based on. So I took different layers of paint and smashed the canvases together,
Okay.
and then that created this like mirrored ink blot pattern, but it's very unpredictable in the sense that like you can't, I mean, there's some levels of control in terms of like how you layer the paint or how the materials you use and things like that, but it's been really interesting. Like I've been doing it in the sketchbook too, like so like laying down a paint layer or a couple of paint layers and just like close the book and see what happens. So that's been really satisfying as well. But I love playing with. I've always loved playing with like organic forms in contrast to like structure. So like I'll take that Rorschach print and I'll paint on top of it with like really structured lines or patterns or things like that.
Okay.
And that's just kind of that's what I've been into lately. um, that was actually bringing it back around to like exhibition pieces or hopefully future exhibition pieces. Um, I was asked to do a design for a party with the Columbia Museum of Art um, that was centered around Alexander McQueen. The exhibit that was opening was
cool.
Alexander McQueen, and like that prompted the question of like what would indigenous or Catawba Alexander McQueen look like? Which that's a layered question given the background and different nuances and things like that. But I really started getting more into like symmetry, but also like false symmetry, where like you look at it and then you look at it some more and you realize that it's not quite mirrored exactly. So I'm playing around with that a little bit and seeing what might happen with some storytelling and some like Catawba influences, so to speak.
I like this. I mean, Alexander McQueen is kind of the king of avant-garde, and having that kind of freedom design-wise to me is always like, I relish that. I love avant-garde. Go big or go home.
Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
so that's gonna be really exciting for me personally to see what you do with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So, well, I'll tell you more too because it's not really a secret. But the piece that you used in the graphic, which I don't know if we can share that or not.
I can find a way. Keep talking though.
Not that's okay.
Yeah.
It's intended to be part of a series, so this would be the second piece in a series, which was inspired by the avant-garde nature of Alexander McQueen. But I thought it would be relevant to bring it back to my indigenous roots, and I'm calling it the Abundant Valley.
Okay.
Is what the series would be, and each piece would focus on either a strength or a weakness within, my opinion only within our community, because with it being Indigenous Peoples Day, there's a lot of like places where we've done a lot of healing and we've done a lot of really good positive things, but there's also a lot of things that I think inherently negatively impact negatively impact the like our community and the society around us. So this would be the second in the piece, or second in the series. It's called this piece is called The Avarice of Ugni. Ugni was a character from our folk tales, and she was greedy, and so avarice being one of the deadly sins, I wanted to highlight the dangers of greed around money specifically, but also just and that's why you see like coins and everything everywhere, but also Ugni kidnapped a child in our story, and she lost the child to he escaped with his mother to the heavens, and Ugni actually fell and became a comet. And so that's part of why like you see her falling is kind of the idea. But I've always loved the imagery of having like a person like that like just malicious and greedy and everything, and so I really think that it spoke to one of the hallmarks of the things that I want to highlight in the series. But also I wanted to show that like very modern, very a little bit metal maybe take on like a very 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 old story.
I love this approach. I do have a question. The crosshatches that you kind of see beneath the coins themselves. I saw the coins, but I don't. What are those? What are the crosshatches or X's beneath the coins, and what do they represent?
So there's a couple of layers to that. For me, I love patterns. I love like structures, and I think that like on a very high level, that's kind of all that is a pattern. But when I was growing up, one of our medicine men taught me the story of how we traditionally believe that evil spirits reside in corners. And so in a lot of the like indigenous, what I consider indigenous artwork, or like the artwork that focuses on Catawba culture, I will intentionally not include corners, just like out of my experience with him, and also just my experience as a Catawba person. That's not necessarily like anything that anybody else has to do, but that's just something I've done. And so with this piece, I kind of wanted to intentionally go against that grain, given what it's intended to represent. Because to me, greed is very, I don't know. This one is kind of intended to be a dark piece. And so that, I certainly don't want to like invite anything in, but I want that to reflect on the nature of the story, which is not intended to be good.
I understand.
So it's a little heavy.
I like that symbolism in there, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I don't think that there's a lot of education when it comes to those stories, just across the board. There's a lot of history that when it comes to languages or when it comes to other cultures that gets lost in some of those stories, and it becomes really important. So truthfully, I'm really glad that you are bringing those to light, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thank you. And that's kind of one of the goals with that, because like as a modern indigenous artist, I think that we have some different conversations to have other than just like colonization. Like colonization is definitely, I think, an undercurrent to almost anything that we do in terms of art or storytelling or interactions. But I think in this series, I hope, and I'm still working out other pieces and stuff like that, but like I hope that I can also kind of highlight some of the things that we see within our community that might not be talked about quite as much. And that's not to make any promises, but it's also just like the perspective of that might be a little different than what could be readily understood by everyone,
Well, there's so much more, there's so many different facets to your life and your community and everything. And I feel like focusing on just the one story or the one aspect, which colonization, as you said, is, I mean, there's so much more. So why not?
It can sometimes come across as reductive, right?
Yeah.
Like, because like, I love what you're saying too, and I agree with you in that. Like, but I think to your point of it being more, there being more, I think that we need to talk about those other things too. But a lot of times we don't necessarily have the tools or the words to talk about it, and so sometimes I think that can be addressed differently through art than it can through like an actual conversation. So that's kind of the goal with all of that.
Yes, and part of why art is so important.
Yes, definitely. And that's also not just unique to indigenous people. You know what I mean? Like that's like everyone's experience, I think. And I think that that's part of why art is so important for self-expression as well.
Right. We had this conversation recently with Joe Delude when he was talking about how when he first put his art out there, it was kind of a high anxiety moment. It always is for most artists to, I say it always for most, but really for most artists, it's kind of a thing to put part of your soul out there. And when you do that, you wonder if people are just going to perceive this one thing they know about you and then apply, you know what I mean? Like, and not see the depth and the multifaceted being that is behind it. And I've been thinking about that ever since that conversation, and how that is true, because when you hear about, for instance, even Alexander McQueen, what do we know about him? Just a couple of things, really.
Yep.
And there was so much more. And I love that you're going there. And I think that's...
Thank you.
It shouldn't be
I
groundbreaking, but it is.
Thank you. I'm trying not to rush it. I would love to line up a solo show for that series. I think I that's kind of a goal with it. We'll see what happens. But I don't know. I have to actually make it first.
Right.
Make the rest of it.
Did you say a solar show?
Solo?
Solo.
Like just me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Solo show. That's so cool. So I have a question about that, and this is going to derail a little bit, maybe. So I apologize.
It's fine.
This
Yeah.
is our whole show, right? We're the derailed.
Yeah. You ever want to hear ADHD in a podcast? That might be this one.
It all started with Felicia Day.
We love her.
Yes, we
love
do.
her so much.
That was amazing. Anyway, so one question that I hear a lot from artists, and perhaps you do too. Oh, yeah, my volume turned down again. We can't hear you, Emily. Thank you, Kaz. So one thing that I hear from other artists, and you may hear this too, and that is how in the world, like, you are obviously an accomplished artist, and you have shows and gallery exhibitions and things like that. How did that start for you? That is one thing that, like, I want to kind of maybe it just explore, so that the people that we reach that are inspired to be artists also kind of have a feeling of maybe how that could happen for them.
So I have a name, Professor Brittany Taylor Driggers at the University of South Carolina at Lancaster. I'm just shameless plug. I don't want to, nobody to blow up her spot or anything like that. But she's an incredible woman. And she allowed me to have my first show.
Cool.
Period. Full stop. And so it was really neat because at the time I was working for the tribal government of the Catawba Nation. Mm-hmm. And I actually called her to help consult on a project that I wanted to happen, which actually never came to fruition. But that, like, conversation opened the door a little bit. And after that, we started talking more. And she learned that I was a photographer. And so it was... I still chuckle a little bit about how I presented my work because it was my first show. And I think that, like, if I had, I don't know. I don't want to be, like, overly critical of myself or of anything either, but it's just it feels, when you look back on other work, sometimes it feels different than how you look at things now. And that, I mean that in a very neutral sense, like neither good nor bad, but it was actually, really cool that they were just simple framed photos. And the premise of the show was just, I think that the show was called Proximity, because it was really about how I get close to things. And that's sometimes through a lens, like the perspective of what the world looks like to me, which was a little bit different than some other Catawba artists because we're known for pottery. Whereas my photography was through the state of South Carolina. And also there was some urban pieces in Charlotte, just because I love Charlotte. That's like second home to me. Mm-hmm. But, my people are not known for being urban. And that kind of presented something a little bit different. So that was my first opportunity. And I think, and I have her entirely to thank for that. After that, I was asked to be the first contemporary artist in residence at the Native American Studies Center at the University of South Carolina at Lancaster, which I was still the artist in residence. Or no, I wasn't still the artist in residence. After that, I actually became an assistant curator, and I started working with them more regularly on different like design projects, and I helped. But that kind of led into other opportunities as well. So like just the kindness and the recognition from one person, Brittany Taylor Triggers, um, opened so many doors for me, and that like I am beyond grateful for those opportunities. Now, that's not to say that I haven't put work into those things. You know, like I recognize, and I think it's important for me to recognize for myself the work that I put into creating works, into networking with people now, into, you know, taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented,
Mm-hmm.
both to me and to other people. But I think that also kind of harkens back to, I want to, wherever I can, network with other people, not only for myself but also like for other artists. You know, so I don't have a lot to offer, or I don't feel like I have a lot to offer in terms of like opportunities there, but I hope that one day I can certainly pay that back
Sure.
in kind.
Very cool. It's
um
always nice to have somebody who originally believed in us
yes,
somehow
yes,
to
absolutely.
give us a boost. That's awesome.
um so that actually put me in touch with the Columbia Museum of Art, that led to some mural work for the city of Lancaster, and it just kind of spiders out from there. You know, that I was part of the Resurgence and Renaissance exhibit, that was actually in partnership with the University of South Carolina
Okay.
and the Columbia Museum of Art. And so they worked together to curate the pieces, and they wanted to show more modern work. So the cool thing about some of the things that I've been fortunate enough to do is, not only do I have the illustrative pieces, but I was commissioned by the center to do some documentary pieces, like from a photographic perspective. So some of my photos in a documentarian sort of way were used in the exhibit as well, to highlight our elders and more traditional works and things like that. And that's something I learned during my residency, is that like I, even though I'm not a traditional artist per se in terms of Native American art, I want my work to harken back to the work of my ancestors. My great grandmother was a potter, and so like I feel a sense of, I almost want to say duty, but I feel a desire to share our stories in a more modern way, and link that back to the stories that have been told for millennia.
Right.
So
Well, because one day you're going to be the ancestor.
right. Oh, Emily. Okay, so this is a thing that I say, okay? Like seriously, because I can't take credit for it. I don't know where it came from. But something like, it slaps you in the face that it's be a good ancestor.
I love that.
That
That's it. You know, like, and that's like that, it literally slaps me in the face on a regular basis, of just like, that informs how I want to live my life. I want to be an ancestor that somebody is going to be like, he was really cool, he did the thing. You know what I mean? And so
Yes.
that's it.
it also speaks to you what you said earlier about sometimes you don't have necessarily the language with which to say it, so you put out your
Yeah.
art. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in small parts, or in a like coming together, you are creating a language that is helping to kind of craft that future.
Yep. Thank you. And I think that, I mean, this is not meant to project on anyone or anything, but I think that we all should. I think that we all do. And that might look, and does look, different for everybody. You know, like I think that the stories that we tell, and however we choose to share them,
Mhm.
should, I mean, again, I don't want to sound too like morally condescending or anything, but just like, I feel like for me, I want those to be things that people look back on in a way like, that's the type of person that I want to be. And that's just kind of, I think that comes from a couple different places, but um
Yeah.
that's just where I've landed in life.
Do you feel like the conversations have changed now that you've kind of been through these spaces where they promoted more contemporary Native American works? Excuse me, one second.
Um,
Oh, sorry. Let me ask that
that was
question.
beautiful.
Do you feel like the conversation has changed, or that by presenting these more contemporary works, that it invites more of a conversation of learning, and changing that perspective?
I would say yes to both.
Okay.
I think that it's interesting because I feel like the conversation is changing.
Mhm.
I have a particular friend who is learning pottery and some very traditional, um, like art practices. I make a face because a lot of people, like anthropologists and different artists, would call it craft, but I really hate that as a term. Like in terms of like, I feel like sometimes it can be a bit diminutive,
Mm.
in terms
Mhm.
of like the art that people make. And so, and what my friend is doing is like so far from anything diminutive, because she's taking some of these like really traditional practices and pieces and things like that, but she's implementing them in such a modern way that like I every time I see more work by her, I want to collaborate with her so bad. And she knows, like we've started talking about it a little bit and things like that, but um, we'll see if it actually happens or not. But I have so much respect for her because she's taking very traditional things and making them more, in a more modern way that's hers and like uniquely hers, but also leads back to the conversation around the importance of like the art and the practices of our ancestors, which is just cool. Like that's really cool. So I hope that answered your question.
It definitely does.
I would also add too, though, I think the conversation is changing around not only like Catawba people, but also like in museum spaces and things like that. They are recognizing the kind of the difference between. I think that we're starting to maybe eschew words like craft or folk art, like things that kind of like put a, a muffle on the talents and skills of people. Um, and that's something that I really appreciate. And I say that because in participating with some like discussion panels and things like that, it was very intentional in the way that they talked about the relevance and also the like the mm, I want to say purpose. I don't feel like that's the right word, but like the approach or perspective of different practices as art as opposed to as like just a cultural practice. So I think that that's a really interesting and
Mm.
very complex and nuanced conversation.
It sounds like it. I'm not gonna lie, like I'm not fully seeing the I don't fully understand the nuances behind it, and I'm not gonna pretend to know that. But
Yeah,
I'm glad to know that there are spaces out there to learn about that.
yeah,
And I'm also feel comfortable expressing that I don't know, but I'm also willing to learn.
and thank you for that. That's I it was really cool. Again, I've had some really cool opportunities with the Columbia Museum of Art, and they had an exhibit earlier this summer.
Mhm.
And it was called Unsettled. It was phenomenal. I don't know if you know the artist Jeffrey Gibson. He presented at the Venice Biennale this
Mm.
year, but he was the first Native American artist to do so. So they actually were able to have a piece of his in the show, and it was just a really neat show. But it was a pinch me moment because they invited me to speak with the curators of this exhibit, from the perspective of like how do we have these conversations around Native American art, but also the the theme of the exhibit was landscape, so they centered the exhibit around these like Wadsworth Athenaeum landscape pieces, like really traditional And I say Wadsworth Atheneum because that's the collection they came from, but like Hudson River Valley landscape art, and those are really iconic and noticeable, but they surrounded each one of these pieces with more modern pieces and different like pieces with different takes from minority communities and from different perspectives. And some of those included indigenous pieces. There was Catawba artwork, or Catawba pottery in the show. And this was a collaboration between 4 different museums. And so it was really refreshing to see them like have the intention, because the original prompt was the American landscape. So you had this like literal and this goes to what you were saying too, I think, Trey, of like you had this literal interpretation of a landscape, but then you also had like, what does a figurative social landscape look like as well, as informed by these other art pieces. And so I feel like I bring all of that up in a long-winded way, sorry, to say that like I think that kind of hit on the same kind of topic that you're saying as well, in the sense that like you had extremely intelligent, informed, educated people who were having the same conversation about like, what does this look like in terms of how we relate to things, who can have those conversations, how do we respect perspectives, and what is appropriate, what isn't, how do we spark these conversations that need to be had. And it really reminded me of like the amount of respect that I have for people like curators and librarians. Because like it was wow all around. But that's also to say that I think that there are some spaces academically where people and places become subjects as opposed to the human element, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And so that applies to quote unquote folk art or quote unquote traditional crafts, and things like that. And I think that it really reduces the impact of these art forms and cultural practices to something that is not necessarily human. Like, that's not to say that folk art or craft isn't human, but it's just like it removes something from the conversation that I think really needs to be there. And I feel like those conversations helped reinforce that for me.
I would agree, and it makes me think of when I first started studying jazz theory, the jazz textbook that I had really very quickly summarized the origins of jazz in particular to an early movement started by African Americans, but within 2 sentences quickly moved on to how people like Duke Ellington, or they took into the George and Ira Gershwin, and they immediately went into a different space of how these individuals took this original concept and then just extrapolated it and really didn't give the full weight of the nuance of where it all came from, how it all started, and really dive into a full breadth of an explanation before they got to what people would know about in more of a quote unquote popular sort of scene. So I say all of that to ask, really, there are moments when I get, I'm just going to say very honestly, uncomfortable because I don't know how to ask some of those questions. I feel comfortable saying I don't know, but then there are times that I'm saying I don't know how to ask this, and I don't know when it's okay to ask certain questions. So when, from your perspective, or how, from your perspective, should someone approach that if they're unsure of maybe how to broach a particular subject?
I love that. And that was an explicit part of that conversation that I was just telling you about too. And I think I'm going to answer your question with a scenario, if that's okay, because
yes, please go for it.
whatever. So, dang, so I would love to be an art history person. I am not always an art history person. there was a piece, and I'll have to pull it up and look it up, but it was a French painter,
Mhm.
and he was a landscape painter, and there was a piece that was in the exhibit that I was just talking about, Unsettled, and his piece stood out because the painting depicted a calm, serene valley with a group of teepees and the daily life, so to speak, of a tribe. So there was a few things there in terms of like it was clear that these people were nomads. Teepees were typically nomadic, um, and it was refreshing from my perspective as like on an initial look because it wasn't like the warring people. You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It showed like people living in this like really beautiful valley. Um, but one of the curators asked the question, was it okay for him to paint this piece? And like I was like, it took me a second because what they were getting at was like, if we're talking about whose story is it to tell, this man followed tribes and he had great relationships with them. He spoke like 5 different tribal languages, and like he built that trust, he built those relationships and everything. But was it okay for him to share this, to like paint this piece, because was that his story to tell? And I think that like that's the first scenario that comes to mind for me in terms of like if there's a question you don't know, because the key is having the relationship. Like he wouldn't have been there if he hadn't had the relationship. I think it's not a simple like, yeah, that's fine, or no, that's not fine in a lot of scenarios, because like if you were to come to me and ask about something with Kataba, we would be fine talking about it because we have that background, we have that, those questions. And so I hope that if you don't already, you know that you could ask those things to me. Now, if you were to reach out to the current tribe, I mean, to the current chief or something of that nature, it probably wouldn't be appropriate because you don't have that established relationship. Um, there's a give and take there, I think, because uh, just like with anything, you don't know what you don't know. And if there was something offensive, then I should be able to explain that to you, hopefully without fault. You know what I mean? But that's kind of like one of the risks that we take. But also, I have to believe that, when going about in the right way and having the right conversations, I don't think that that's really a concern for us. If Joe Schmo came off the street and said, "Hey, what's that?" Or my favorite one that I chuckle about sometimes is, well, one of many favorites is like, "Oh, I like your costume," when people are dressed in traditional regalia, but it's not a costume; it's a different thing. So um, it it's tough and there's nuance, but it all comes back to the trust in the relationship.
And it's kind of circling back, it also speaks to the human element of
Yes.
making sure that we're speaking to the human, not the concept.
Yes. Yep. Um, you have to consider both, but you have to consider the humanity first, right? Like you have to consider like the person at the other end. And I think that like I think sometimes people either don't know enough or don't care enough to do that. And I don't know. I think that we could do to consider that a little bit more.
Agreed. To your point, I think it gets very nuanced very quickly, and when
Oh
you
yeah.
start layering nuances, it complicates things at times.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Um, from from an artistic standpoint, you've mentioned how certain phrases or certain words can make things diminutive of a culture that you're experiencing. So what are some ways that people could even on their own terms, be better acquainted with language or
Ooh.
become better. Um, I'm going to use educated. Please take this with a grain of salt because it's the only word that's come to mind. Um, on using appropriate terminology to describe some things that they're viewing, not just from a cultural standpoint, but also from
Mhm.
an artistic standpoint. How can they become more aware of using proper artistic terminology?
Oh, that's a good one, and that's so hard. Because I mean, I experienced this with other cultures myself. You know, cultures that aren't Native American. I have a lot of friends in a lot of different cultures. My partner is Dominican and Cuban, and so like there have been instances where I don't know the how to ask about certain things with his beliefs or with his experiences and things like that. And so I try to be cognizant, and I think that it kind of goes back to the same thing of like it goes back to your relationship and the trust that you build and things like that. I think too, ignorance is not always an insult.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not going to call somebody ignorant, but I think that in terms of like thinking of yourself and your relationship to a conversation, like reminding yourself that being ignorant is not always a bad thing. So I think the way that you approach that is the key of like, are you asking like artistic language and, traditional items and things like that? Asking. I think that that's like kind of the key to it too. Like you have to ask in order to educate yourself
Mm-hmm.
or to allow someone to educate you, which like I know online sometimes that can be a little bit discouraging because people get tired. But I think that like keeping it simple of like, what is this called? Or like, what is this used for? What is the purpose? What is that practice? Keeping it really simple and respectful, I think is so much better than just like, what's that? You know what I mean? And I don't mean that to be like dismissive of a what's that, because I think that can be perfectly appropriate too. But I think that your approach and your tone and being ready to have a reverence or treat something with respect, that goes a long way with when you're trying to make connections with people, in terms of art. Like my art is not super. I mean, my art, I feel like I try to present in a way that is there's not a lot there that might be like culturally disrespectful, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, I think that there certainly are artists because it's also our job as artists to be able to talk about what we've made. So I think that like where appropriate and when appropriate, asking those questions in a way that's like, well, what was the purpose? Like we did earlier, what was the purpose of that pattern? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that was a traditional belief of my people, but like you asked it in a perfectly respectful way. Like what's the purpose of that pattern there, and why were you drawn to include that? I think that that's great. And if you receive something otherwise, the question might not be right, not just because of you asking it. It might not be right because the artist might not be able to put the words together to tell you, and that can also be a challenge. So it's not
Communication.
always
Yeah.
just you. Yeah, yeah, it's a communication thing, exactly. And now, Emily, I'm actually curious about like your thoughts on this whole piece about like respect in art, because like that's really, I think that that's I don't know, that's a really interesting angle, and I
It
don't think
is.
about it often, and I love it.
Well, nobody really loves walking on eggshells, and
Yeah.
I feel like that's uncomfortable for anybody to be in that spot. And I think as people, though, we're also open to talking about ourselves and our experience and our art. And I think there's we get in our own way sometimes, like this. Yeah, I mean that's like a
All the
general
time.
thing. Yeah,
All the
right. But
time.
I mean,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
as
yeah.
a person who is, as a white person who is out there in the world interacting with all cultures, We are told sometimes from other white people, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't express that. You can't eat that food.
Yep.
You cannot use that hairstyle. You cannot stop. And so then some people, and I don't want to open this big can of worms, but some people get to where there's like, okay, it's uncomfortable now to bring anything up because I've been told I can't, I shouldn't, so much that I don't know how at all to even begin to ask about the crosshatch design in your art, because it feels wrong to like, now I'm crossing a line by just asking about it, even though I'm probably not. And so there's some part of where we've built these walls up to where we're walking on eggshells to some degree. Not everybody, but I feel like from my perspective, there are words that I am second guess using because someone once said somewhere on the internet that I shouldn't. And so and it's like, it's easier to, without using profanity, it's sometimes easier to use profanity because that's more acceptable than using a word that maybe I would normally use in everyday speech. Does that make sense?
I love this. I love this so much. Yes.
I'm so glad.
Okay, so I want to. So
sorry if I can interrupt for just a second.
Yeah.
Emily, can you double check your mic?
My mic. Gosh. I have this problem with there's something going on with my computer. I need to fix it.
I'm so sorry. Please go away.
Some program on my
just doesn't wanna
computer
be part of
makes
the
my mic.
conversation.
It's because probably it's too close. It's probably me. I lean in and I get excited. And then, there it went down. Okay. I probably need to repeat something, and I don't know what I needed to repeat, but hopefully nothing.
Well, okay. I have a follow up to that. Because
Yeah, please do.
I want to hear from you guys, and I'm sorry to like turn the table, but I think Trey knows enough by now that I like to do that.
No, it's great. Let's do it.
What for y'all as artists, because you both are artists too, what was the first art related safe space that you can remember?
Ooh, good question.
Oh, wow.
I can think of one.
I can think of one.
I can name that
sharing? I'd love to hear about it.
I can name that tune in 4 notes, Trey.
I can name it in 2 notes. If you don't mind, I'll kick it off and say,
go.
Growing up in Texas, I thought that my first safe space would have been one of my art classes there or one of my choir groups. But truthfully, they weren't, because they were predominantly white people. So it never felt truly like a truly safe space for me, because I wasn't surrounded by diverse groups. It always felt like I was walking on eggshells of the beliefs of people around me. So I think it wasn't until I got into high school where I was truthfully around an incredibly diverse group of people in a choir room and being able to look at somebody and understand mentally and physically that there were so many different walks of life around me, and that I was going to be creating art in this space around people, and they didn't care if I messed up. They were supporting me in any kind of capacity. I never felt like I had to walk on eggshells. So Farah Boudry, if you are listening to this, thank you for creating my artistic safe space.
Snaps. I'm gonna give snaps for that. Emily, what about you, if you're comfortable sharing?
Kaz in the chat answered pretty well, honestly, because she said, the Ren Fair for me. And I thought about that because I wasn't even going to go back that far, but now I realize I have to. It is definitely Ren Fair. That is when I have a friend to thank that I used to work with for bringing up the Ren Fair at work one day. And she was like, oh, yeah, you go and you get like your little, you get like the little hair wrap done, and then there's a joust, and there's turkey legs, and this castle, and it's all like everybody dresses up like this, late 1500s or whatever era. And I went, this exists?
Yeah.
What? And like I grew up loving castles so much. Like that was architecturally, but just like in general, like that whole, I'm a romantic, okay? Thus the show.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I have to go. And she goes, you've never even heard of this? And I was like, no. And she goes, yeah, it's like an hour away. It's like really close. You should go. And so I did. Like then it wasn't quite the next week, but it was close enough. It was like within 2 weeks I was up there going, and it was like a game changer, because then it was like, oh, now I have to make a costume, and now I have to dive into this world. And I did. And the moment that I did, it was like, folks, let me tell you, the first time you like wear a costume, even if it's bad, okay, even if it's bad, people walk up to you and you're like one of them. You're not just one of them, they want their picture taken with you. You are like on their mantle at home, and like I don't know how else to describe that, because they took their picture and they framed it and they put it on the mantle, and now you're on somebody's mantle, and you had no idea like you were that much part of these lives and this thing. And that was back at a time when it was kind of like, these are the super geeks that hang out at the Renfest. But it's definitely become more mainstream, which I love. I think that needed to happen. But also like that was it. That was the safe space.
I think for me, the first one that I remember is, of course, it's weirdly nerdy, but it was a Socratic circle in one of my English classes. And like that was like one of the first ones that I remember. And then as I thought more, I realized that I also felt that some in orchestra, but the Socratic circle stood out to me because it was one of the first places where you could ask any question, like any question at all, and like nobody could make fun of you for it. Nobody could like it had to build, like you had to build the conversation with those questions instead of like interacting in somewhat of a negative way, right? Like, oh well, I didn't like that question, let's move on. You had to build on it, and it was kind of an improv situation now that I think about it more. But like the same can be said for both of your scenarios too. But then another word comes to mind as well, and that's community. Like, I mean, I think that when you actually find true community, I've been thinking about this a lot because of some experiences that my family members have and things like that. Like when you actually have true community, like those can create safe spaces for you. So like for me, that also was a GSA at a local university. Before I had ever figured anything out about myself, I found a safe space at Winthrop University because there was a GSA. I found a space like that in my Spanish class for a different literary project, but it was the same concept of like nobody can make fun of you for asking a quote unquote stupid question. And I think that we need that in art. Like we need that in art spaces. And so like those, including this conversation right now, have always been the most educational for me, because there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I always want to, I like Modern Romantic is a safe space. Like this is a safe space to have those conversations. I love, can I plug another podcast? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Please.
I'm obsessed with it. It's called Ologies with Allie Ward. And the premise of her show is just she interviews people who study things. So they are the ologists. You know what I mean? And you have everything. Yeah. You have everything. From cosmologists to neurologists to like, the last one that I listened to was on tardigrades. And so but like it was all about asking people questions in a safe space. And I think that like, going back to the Be a Good Ancestor, going back to like the museum conversations, because museums can be safe spaces too. I think that can be. There's a giant asterisk there. But we need spaces where you can ask those questions, to your point, Trey, about culture, about like, we have a cultural center here, and while I don't know, I would fully expect that the people that are teaching there are equipped to answer questions in a way that is respectful and kind. And when I'm talking about my art, whenever I'm talking to another artist, that is really going to gauge what kind of person they are, for me at least, in the way that they can talk to other people about what it represents, or about their culture, or about their experiences. I think that that's like an essential and integral part of maturity as a, and again, I don't mean that to be condescending, but like I will venture forward to say that, like, I think that if you cannot create a safe space with that, then for one reason or another, it's not a conversation that's ready to be had. That could be because someone doesn't feel safe. So like, I certainly want to acknowledge that too. But it also could be that, like, if you're not able to articulate it or able to ask it, sometimes it's just that you're not ready. And that's not bad. It's just that, like, it's another opportunity for another time.
Yeah, it's okay to go back and think about it a little bit longer, because there's a big difference between going, what's with the yellow X's, and tell me why you included this crosshatch pattern in your art.
Yeah. Well, and like, again, this was a safe space, so like, that absolutely was a phenomenal question, and I love that Trey asked that. I also, just, the chat popped up on my screen for a second, but I think that's absolutely so true in different spaces within queer and kink communities too. I think that can be exceedingly challenging, because just like Native American culture, even though it's a totally different thing, people are tired. You know what I mean? Like, we're tired and we're threatened sometimes. And so that makes spaces not safe. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong necessarily. But like, I think that if we can, there's a huge caveat with that too. If we can, I certainly want to contribute to making safe spaces for people too. And that's really kind of all we can do, whether it be for artists, for queer people, for Native people, for people who have questions about things, like, I think that's big.
It is
heavy.
It is. And it takes a long time. It takes a long time to create sometimes safe spaces that are what am I trying to say? Like, where it's more widely accepted, or at least to the point where people can talk about it anytime, anywhere, kind of thing, instead of, not, like you said, not feeling safe to bring it up just anywhere. That's poorly worded, and I didn't mean to say it that way.
No. I think though, like, to your point, that's part of why I have so much respect for some artists, especially like artists that are in minority groups. I see, and I have a friend, for instance, who, she is a Black artist, and she makes incredible, like, comics and like stories and things about her experiences, and I would never know how to ask about any of it. You know what I mean? And like, but I'm able to get a glimpse of those things that maybe I should know about through the things that she creates. I also see, I think about Jeffrey Gibson, which I am still learning about him, so I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert, but he's an indigenous artist and he's a fashion designer. And through looking at his exhibit at the Venice Biennale, he made this whole space that presented this like really contemporary modern art and everything. But I think it's so cool to say things like that, because it leads us to other questions about, like, well, what is, if he is presenting this in a certain way, he can talk about this in that kind of way. And I think that that's true for any minority artist, any not minority artists. You know what I mean? I think that, like, art helps open those conversations a little bit, even if, like, it helps teach us the way to have those conversations.
Yes.
I'm learning tonight too. So that was an epiphany for me. So thank you.
It's amazing to see. I'm going to back that up. I'm going to start a different statement. I love having conversations with you, period. And it's
Thank you.
more because it's the way that you approach conversations and the articulateness of, I know that's not a word, but the way that
I love
It is
it.
now.
it is now, but the way that you articulate your communication outwardly, it's that you've given so much of this space inside of your cranium and then allowed it to stew and like become such a well-crafted statement from a place of empathy, because I feel like it comes from a place of checking to make sure, is this empathetic, am I being respectful, does this cross any boundaries, etc. And it goes through this very well-crafted sort of thought process in order to then come out of your mouth and be really a, failing with words, but it's what you are hoping to see other people do. So, really having conversations with you is easy. And it's also just really fun because you always approach it from the same way, the same empathetic place. And that's why I really enjoy talking to you. So, thank you.
Oh, Trey, stop it.
No,
This
I'm
is,
going to keep going.
You know, it's funny because
I'm glad this is being recorded.
Yes, right. Play it over and over and over again. If you want.
You said this on Indigenous Peoples Day in 2024.
You get like an award or something. I don't know what kind of award and for what, but some kind of something.
But I just want to take a moment to say that again, that's why I love having you on here, and that's why I love having you in my
Thank you.
life, is just from the phenomenal human that you are.
Thank you, Trey.
You're welcome.
Stop it. I need a minute. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're welcome.
I
Sorry, go ahead.
I want to give a shout out to anxiety for some of that.
Wow.
But
Valid, yeah.
I think I was actually trying to find a way to say this in like the last piece of our conversation, but I think that this is actually a perfect way to talk about it. And that's that, like, my experiences, I'm looking at myself on the camera right now, and I don't necessarily look very indigenous, and that's something that I like, that can actually open a whole can of worms too, of like, what does indigenous look like, what is, like all of these things. But the thing is that if you meet me on the street, aside from maybe my eyes and maybe what I have on that day, I don't know, maybe if I've been in the sun a lot, you wouldn't be able to tell, other than he might be a little bit some kind of spicy something. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? But the thing is that, like, I think that it's also important in this conversation about indigenous art, about indigenous people's day, about perspectives and experiences and things like that, is that I have had to, part of the way I've learned to have those conversations the way that I have is I have had to see experiences from people that don't look like me. And I don't want that to be misconstrued in the way that, like, I can't speak for other people. So that's not what I'm saying either. But I always want to consider the people in my community, different layers of community, different types of community that aren't like me, that have different life experiences, whether because of how they look, whether because of how they were born, whether that because of how they were raised, all of those things. Because I want someone to afford me the respect to acknowledge and validate my experiences. I want to do that for other people too. And so, like, I can, in this entire conversation, I can only speak to my own perspectives, my own experiences. But I want to have conversations like this in a way that opens or creates safe spaces for other people to share in kind, if and when they want to. Because like, I think of we were talking about like if we can have certain conversations on here, right? I think of everything kind of like BDSM. And hear me out, because everything ties back to consent. Everything. Okay. Like the consent of sharing my story, the consent of me asking, will you share with me, and you offering it or not, the consent of feeling safe, the consent of like, this is the agreement, I can revoke that consent at any time. I think that applies also to conversations and to interactions that might not just be when you're naked, but I think that like when you use that to inform creating a safe space, having a productive or educational conversation, having all of these other things, acknowledging the needs or desires of someone else because of how they were raised, because of how they look, because of how they present, that changes everything. And in my experience, it has changed everything for the better. And so like, I feel like it makes it a lot easier to think about if a conversation is okay or not, if we can establish, hey, are you comfortable talking about this with me or not?
Yeah,
if not, cool.
Yeah, most people would rather be asked the question.
Yeah. And like, and in a BDSM situation, you always ask straight up. Like, you know what I mean? Like you it's funny, but like you always ask because you never want there to be doubt. And I think that that's important for conversations too. That took a turn from something really nice, Trey, to me talking about BDSM. So thank you both for being patient with me on that.
You're welcome.
Feel free to edit that bit
out. I still think that your point about consent is 100% accurate, and it doesn't necessarily matter the space that you're in. Consent definitely matters. And if there's a question of whether the topic is you can approach the topic or not, it seems like your point was ask for consent. If you're unsure, ask. Get clarity.
Always. And Emily, I want a screen cap of your face whenever I said BDSM. Your eyes just went like this.
Because I was like, no, that has not come up on the show until today.
Oh, and sorry.
I don't think anyone was expecting it either. I don't think anybody was expecting it either. Well, I wasn't. Maybe Trey was. I don't know.
No.
Well, I'm sorry if that crossed the line.
It's okay. No, I mean
we're
no, it wasn't that. It was that it was like not expecting.
No.
Yeah. Where is this going? Has he lost it finally?
We've had some fun parallels drawn before.
Well, first for everything.
Right. Yeah.
How do you say thank you in Catawba?
Hau.
Hau?
Hau?
Yes.
Well, Hau, Alex.
So it's HAWU, and then we write it as like a little tiny H sometimes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we don't write it at all. But it's an aspirated H. So it's only there if you like believe. And so if you say Hau, just like normal, but then at the end you blow out. Hau.
Hau.
Okay.
It's hard to hear the difference, right? So you have Hau or Hau.
Yeah, I hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Hau is thank you.
Well, Hau, Alex. God, I was about to go into Tanake at the same time, so I was about to say thank you, hello, Alex.
Actually, that leads into a good little comedy point too. Well, sort of comedy. If you ever want a good, I might have said this on the last show. I'm not sure. If you ever want a good read-in on indigenous humor, watch one of the many things now. Which actually, last time, I don't know that we talked about all of these things, but you can watch. It's an older movie. It's from the 80s. I say older with caution. It's called Smoke Signals. It actually has Irene Bedard, who ironically voiced Pocahontas for Disney. She's in it, and there's a joke in there about, "Hey Victor, sorry about your dad," basically, because the whole plot of the story is that his dad isn't around, like that sort of thing. And so it gets a little dark, to be honest, but it's more, my username is more of a pop culture reference to Hey Victor, because it's Hey Alex.
Oh, okay.
So Tanake is like, hey, welcome, hello. I gotta check the welcome thing, but I know it's hey or hello. So Tanake.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Pop culture references. Obscure pop culture references.
From way back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, see, those are my favorite. But Alex, I mean, I'm going to reiterate again that any time that I can spend with you is always just a treat. And having you on the podcast today has just been, again, an absolute treat, pleasure, and all of the adjectives. So thank you.
An honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we go, as always, my first question to you is going to be, how can our listening audience support you as an artist? Where can they go to interact with you and keep up with you on social media?
Sure. So on Instagram is probably the best. I'm Tanake Alex. I also have a website. It's tanakealex.com. Trying to think if there's anywhere else. If you look at my threads, it's absolutely unhinged. So just brace yourself for that if you decide to check that out. But I am there. Yeah, that's pretty much where everybody could find me. In terms of support, I think that I would give some gentle homework of I would love for people to reflect on what we've talked about today, just because I think that helps everybody. Conversations like this help me be a better person, I feel like, and to think about things in a way that isn't just my own perspective. So I think that the world could use a little bit more of that, and that's not meant to be self-serving, but just I think that considering each other's perspectives and consent and all of those things, I think could help us have better conversations about art, romance, and really anything else that life has to offer. So that's what I would ask.
All right, everybody, you got homework. Go do it. This will be graded. It will be handed in, so please make sure it's legible.
Blue or black ink only.
Yes, 100%. None
For
of this
legal
green.
purposes.
None of this green nonsense. No green. My last question is, you asked us some incredible questions, and we asked you some incredibly difficult questions. So my last difficult question to you is, what is a question that you wish people would ask you more?
Ooh, that would ask me more. Who do I make this out to?
That's perfect.
That might be the best answer yet.
I feel like that can't be my final answer, though. Then I just sound
greedy. Yeah, no.
Greedy.
That was great, though. That was wonderful. No one's answered that before.
In all seriousness, that's a really hard question. I feel like I feel like this conversation has actually not been that hard, but like I don't know how to answer that like seriously.
I feel like it's one of those
Um,
that I would even have to sit and think about my answer if I were to be
yeah,
asked the same question. Because, like, Trey, what's a question that you wish people asked you more?
I think I've got it though. I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
I wish people would ask me what my favorite art piece is more.
Hmm. Of
And I
your
say
own?
that because no, just in general.
Okay.
Because A, it would inspire some more hope that other people like art on levels that we do, which is just completely unrealistic. But I think it's also just that like it would start conversations like we've had tonight.
Mm.
Well, why do you like that? What does that say to you? What is the meaning of all of this? And I think that like that's one of like so many things I love about art is that it allows us to talk about things. And so I think that if people asked me what my favorite piece was, it would give me an opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
not only tell them, but maybe ask them too. So,
Well, I think I'm going to see you Saturday night at movie night.
yes, yes.
So I will actually ask you that question, and then we can
Okay.
trade responses.
Yes, that sounds great.
Just not during the movie.
What is movie
No,
night? What a.
I mean, but we could get into a whole thing about cassette futurism.
Ooh, okay. I don't know what that is, but I'd love to find out.
So that's your homework, Trey. Look up
Okay.
cassette futurism.
Find out.
All right, cassette futurism.
Yes.
Also, like, what is movie night and how do I go?
So my partner, I guess like a month or two ago now, Alien Romulus came out,
Okay.
and it takes place between Alien and Aliens. So, which really is just, as a former communications professional, I think I would maybe make some suggestions on this titling scheme. But we had to watch the first one to do it in order. So we watched the first one, and then we went to this really cool theater called the Gem Theater in Kannapolis, North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
And it had been renovated, and it was really, really cool. So we saw Alien Romulus, which was actually really good. I would recommend people see it if you like that genre of movie. And so we're gonna watch Aliens at my partner's place.
I see.
This coming Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've actually never seen it before, so
I haven't either. I haven't seen this one. I saw Alien, obviously, and then I've seen a lot of like the Alien Prometheus, movies. So
okay.
I like all kinds of movies.
Yeah.
If you guys are open to having me back sometime, I would love to have conversations about cinema and photography, like focus on photography.
Just Sandra, if you're listening, book it now. We will, because I'm in on this for sure.
I just started doing 35 millimeter photography again.
Oh.
Yeah. So like that's been a whole adventure.
I love this, and the answer is yes for sure. I am in because I was just telling Trey not too long ago about how we should make a movie, and it's like secretly a dream of mine to make like music videos, and
cool.
I love the idea of making a movie trailer, but also a whole movie. So yes. Also, Kaz.
Now I will disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't consider myself a videographer, but I want to be. I would love to be like, I love talking about movies and like in nerdy photography things. So I might make a fool of myself, but I'm willing to make a fool of myself with you guys. So
let's make fools of ourselves. I'm in.
Please.
Kaz said, let's see. Rewinding back to Aliens, or the movie night. I want to be part. Wait. I want to be part of this. And then once the word aliens was spoken, it was never mind. You guys have fun. I'll hide somewhere away from aliens. And then movie chatter and making a movie. I want to help with that. And then I have like 10 scripts for videos. So
let's go.
Let's
go.
To that episode. Another idea for one that I think you might
Yes.
Okay, I'm excited.
And now my mic went back. There we go. Okay. Sorry. I have to monitor this like it's yeah. Anyway, thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Yes.
This was so
Thank you for
cool.
having
I'm
me.
glad I finally got to talk to you and that
Me
we get to
too.
talk again about really cool nerdy things. So,
Yes.
yay.
Yes. Love it. Love it.
Well, this episode, along with probably every other episode, will be dedicated to Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, passionate encourager, and greatly missed friend. You can find us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. For updates, announcements, and more, you can follow us on social media under Modern Romantic. Also, we have a Patreon. If you want to throw a couple dollars our way and get access to exclusive content, please visit the Mod Rom on Patreon to see conversations, clips, and more. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And question for you tonight: what was your first safe space? Please email us and tell us your safe space, and we'll read some of the comments out on the air. Have a great night, everybody.